Once again, very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us today, this event on the work of the Adaptation Fund in the Pacific States. My name is Vladislav Arnaoudov, but most of you know me as Vlad, and I'm a coordinator of the Adaptation Fund Technical Evaluation Reference Group Secretariat and also a Senior Evaluation Officer, and I'll be the moderator of this event. Before we start, I want to extend my enormous gratitude to our hosts of the Moana Blue Pacific Pavilion today, who agreed to have this event here. And although the title says Adaptation Fund, and we'll talk about the Adaptation Fund, actually this event is really about the Pacific. It's about the people in the Pacific. And I want to have this event as a platform where over the next 50 minutes, we'll be able to talk about what the Adaptation Fund is doing here, what you're looking for from the Adaptation Fund, what we have learned from the work of the Adaptation Fund. So please feel free to send us questions, and I hope that you're going to enjoy this event. So without any further ado, I want to give the floor to the head of the Adaptation Fund, Mikko Ollikainen, for some opening remarks. Mikko, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vlad, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here at the Pacific Blue Moana Pavilion. It's also a pleasure to invite you to this joint side event by the Adaptation Fund and the Adaptation Fund Technical Evaluation Reference Group. I believe this is the first one that we've ever done in a COP, and it's quite a landmark. It goes to show that we really value the collaboration that we have our evaluators. They help us improve our work. Sometimes they are very critical, but usually they still are very helpful in making us work better, and we have a really good cooperation with them. As we know, being on the dangerous warming trend towards 1.5 degrees and possibly beyond that, the world faces escalating threats in many areas, and those are felt nowhere more acutely than in the Pacific region. And that's why the Adaptation Fund has a portfolio of projects that is growing in the Pacific region, and the small island developing states have a special role in the Adaptation Fund, including through a dedicated seat on our board. The Adaptation Fund was established in 2001 under the UNFCCC and launched in 2007. It's mandated to assist developing country parties that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change by helping them to meet the costs of adaptation by financing concrete adaptation projects and programs. And these are country-driven, needs-based projects and programs that are based also on the views and priorities of the communities that the fund serves. The Adaptation Fund has also pioneered direct access, which empowers countries more than previously to have more ownership of the resources that the countries receive from us, from this international fund. And we're very happy that we have a few national implementing entities in the Pacific region, including in Tuvalu, in Cook Islands, and Federated States of Micronesia, and also two very competent regional implementing entities, including SPREP and the SPC, which are also expanding their role in some areas of our work, as we will speak later. We're very pleased to work with several countries in the Pacific already. We know that the threats of climate change are imminent. For me personally, it was quite startling to learn about Tuvalu's National Climate Change Survival Plan, which is I believe, the first one of its kind, but also goes to show how important it is to address the impacts of climate change in the region. The Adaptation Fund is currently implementing its second medium-term strategy. The strategy focuses on climate action, climate innovation, and learning and sharing. And especially in the area of innovation, we also hope to work with the Pacific countries because SPREP and SPC have already signed up to play a role in that innovation work. The funding that we provide is grant-based funding, which is very important for adaptation. Also, it's provided on a full cost basis, which means that we do not require co-financing from other sources. Each country around the world has the same country cap of $20 million, and this is quite relevant, especially for small island developing states. So countries in the Pacific have exactly the same country cap as countries like India, for example. So I would consider this as an added value for small island developing states. So let me stop here. I really look forward to this exchange, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mikko, for this opening remarks. So now we will move into the first part of our event. And as the Adaptation Fund is a learning organization and we want to listen to the voices of the people that we serve, we have with us two representatives of the Pacific, and they'll talk to us briefly about their experience working with the Adaptation Fund and how we have been supporting them. So without further ado, I want to give the floor first to a representative of the youth in the Pacific. And also, this is Miss Mikino. She's from the Cook Islands and works with the Ministry of Finance and Economic Management. She joined the ministry straight from high school in 2018. She's a passionate advocate of climate change, and this is her first COP, where she's negotiating following climate finance stream. So Ms. shared with us prior to this meeting that she's looking forward to being further involved in Adaptation Fund projects, especially now that the Ministry of Finance and Economic Management is reaccredited with the AF. So, Mi, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kia ora and greetings. Thank you, Vlad, for the introductions. And again, extending my apologies for my director, Mr. Mani Mate, as I'll be presenting on behalf of Ministry of Finance and Economic Management's Cook Islands. I'll just get into it and keep my presentations nice and brief and concise and within the time frame. So to begin with, Ministry of Finance is the national implementing entity of the adaptation on behalf of the governments of the Cook Islands. We are comprised of 15 small islands, 12 islands that are inhabited, and 7 islands that has the highest points of less than 15 meters. My home country is very small, and thus saying that we are very much vulnerable to the range of natural, man-made climate hazards, which consist of coastal erosions due to sea level rising, tsunamis, droughts, floodings, and ocean acidification. So I'll be just sharing our experiences working closely with the Adaptation Fund in relations to the opportunities that were provided through 2 projects funded by AF and as an NIE to support and to strengthen climate change adaptation, especially in the remote and isolated areas, which we call Pa'inua, which makes Cook Islands as a whole. So the Cook Islands has maintained and our collaboration and sustainable relationships with AF just well over 10 years, and that's just half my life year span. So privileged to be in this space. In 2011, the Cook Islands AF, implemented by the UNDP, called Strengthening the Resilience of Our Islands and Our Communities to Climate Change, which is also known as the SPREP Climate Change Project, which was executed by our national ministry, Office of the Prime Minister, Climate Change and Emergency Divisions from 2012 to 2018. So the SPREP project was an integrated community-based adaptation and mitigation measure that was related to crop production, tourism, coastal protection, fisheries, health, and water resources management. And in 2016, through the new streamlined accreditation process for smaller entities that were adopted in 2014, MFIM was accredited as the 5th new national implementing entity to join the AF for a term of 5 years. And so Cook Islands is one of many AF NIEs in the climate vulnerable developing countries around the world that is benefiting the pioneering direct access modality, which provides us with the support to build our own in-house country capacity to adapt and to strengthen resilience to climate change by receiving the financial support and developing our own projects directly. So our first project as a NIE to the AF is called the Pearl Project, which stands for Pa'enua Action for Resilient Livelihoods. And in my mother tongue, akamatutu'anga kia tukatau te oranga I te pa'enua. And this was approved and implemented from June 2018 to 2022 last year. So now we're just in the current phase of closing the project's life cycle. Following the expiry of MFIM's accreditation in 2021, we now have been accredited again as the NIE, which was approved for another 5 years at the last adaptation board that was held in October this year, 2023. So the AF accrediting to MFIM NIE with the responsibility to administer our first grants for the implementation of the Pearl project has been a big milestone for our country. The relationship that we have created really enhanced our capacity just in the overall management of our Pearl program. So, which includes our financial and monitoring reports, and just the responsibilities that were entailed. This has helped MFIM strengthen our institutional frameworks and our skilled personnel that is dedicated to climate resilient initiatives. And to add on that, MFIM holds the highest standard of financial integrity in the Cook Islands, ensuring that the funds of NIE are utilized efficiently and transparently to maximize their impact. We are very committed to community engagements and involvement in the design, planning, and implementation of adaptation projects, and ensuring that local knowledge is shared and the needs are met and considered. To conclude, I would just like to say the Cook Islands Ministry of Finance and Economic Management is very privileged and honored to continue our collaboration with AF. And as the national implementing entity, we do look forward to the next 5 years term to improve improve the efficiency of our project implementation to combat my homeland, my people, my country, vulnerabilities to the adverse impacts, reiterating natural, man-made, and climate hazards in the Cook Islands. So yeah, that's pretty much. Thank you for your time. Me taki maata, ke rana e ke manuia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mi, for this presentation and for the kind words of support to our work. I was very happy to hear that the Adaptation Fund is reaching the most vulnerable people, but also helping build capacity for climate finance in your country. So this is really great. Thank you so much. And now I want to hand over the floor to another representative of the Pacific, this time from a regional entity from SPREP. So we have with us Ms. Salome Tukuafu. She's with the project coordination unit of SPREP, working with the Adaptation Fund. Salome holds a degree in international law from the University of London, more than 10 years of experience working in the Pacific region and supporting Pacific states in building their capacity to access climate finance. So Salome, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vlad, and thank you in particular to the Adaptation Fund as well as the Technical Evaluation Reference Group for the opportunity to participate in today's panel, but also more importantly for having your event hosted here in our space at COP28. I know that oftentimes in the implementation of our funded activities with adaptation funds, resources due to the geographical spread of our islands, but also the lack of proximity to the fund secretariat, these opportunities are rare. And so we really, I'm sure that I speak on behalf of our Director General and Director Climate Change and Resilience to thank particularly the head of the fund secretariat, Mr. Miko Alkinen, as well as to the Technical Evaluation Reference Group team for bringing your event here to the Pacific Pavilion. Thank you also to my fellow panelist, Mi, who represents one of our member countries, the Cook Islands, for the very insightful presentation on the work of the Adaptation Fund in the Cook Islands. Congratulations. By way of introduction, I know that Vlad has made a very generous introduction of myself, but I work for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, or SPREP's Project Coordination Unit. We undertake oversight of our function as a regional accredited entity to both the Adaptation Fund as well as the Green Climate Fund. And in terms of my intervention today, I'm afraid it's not as exciting as Mi's presentation, but I've decided to structure my very brief intervention, because I know my colleague Audrey is keeping time very strictly, around three aspects of our experience in accessing and utilizing the Adaptation Fund's resources. And the first is around our experience in access to climate finance, with a focus on direct access through the Adaptation Fund. The second is around our experience in the utilization of Adaptation Fund resources. And the third is on the way forward, some of our experience in forward-looking towards programming, as well as our proposed pipeline for the coming year. So around the first aspect on access to climate finance, I was very pleased to hear from Mr. Alkinen on his mention of the low levels of access to climate finance for small island developing states, and in particular the Pacific, who have in general as a region the lowest representation in terms of our access to climate finance. Out of the three funds under the UNFCCC's financial mechanism, which are the GCF, the Global Environment Facility, and the Adaptation Fund, in terms of the Pacific's access, our access to Adaptation Fund resources has the lowest allocation out of those three funds. However, there is value, of course, in our experience in accessing the Adaptation Fund's resources, and I will come to that. Just to illustrate that level of access, in terms of Pacific countries, and in particular Pacific SIDS, 14 in total, access to Adaptation Fund resources, this sits at just over 16% of the available single country caps, despite the increase to 20 million per country. There is value, of course, in the direct access route that we have found. One of the lessons we've learned in terms of our experience is that the harmonization across the climate funds has been particularly helpful in our ability not just to get through direct access requirements, but also in the re-accreditation process. So we were initially accredited to the Adaptation Fund in 2015 and recently re-accredited in 2021. One of the things that supported this experience of re-accreditation was the fact that we had also gone through an accreditation process with the Green Climate Fund. So much of the strengthening of our institutional systems and policies went a long way in supporting our re-accreditation process. I think it's important to highlight the value of direct access, that the direct access route, and I've spoken about this as well on a recent panel for the GCF, is only of value if it leads to countries or entities being accredited to actually access climate finance. And we've heard from the Cook Islands, and we're congratulations to the Cook Islands as a national implementing entity that's been accredited to the Adaptation Fund for accessing climate finance for a project directly through that accreditation route. In the Pacific, besides SPREP, as Vlad had touched on, the other regional accredited entity is, of course, SPC. And at the country level, besides the Cook Islands, the Ministry of Finance for Tuvalu has also been accredited. I'm not sure if I've missed another country, but those are the two that we do work quite closely with. And from my understanding, since accreditation, Tuvalu has yet to access financing for a fully funded proposal. So this really looks at some of the questions around the value of or the necessity for accreditation, because for most Pacific countries that have accessed previously ODA under other multilateral financing institutions, such as the MDBs, they haven't had to go through an accreditation process. So that's the point that I wanted to make on access to climate finance with a focus on direct access. The second point that I wanted to make on utilization, and as a caveat, I want to say that that SPREP as a regional accredited entity has one project under implementation with the Adaptation Fund, which was approved in 2017 and under implementation since 2018. It's a project valued at $9 million with the Federated States of Micronesia, which focuses on the water sector. I'll touch briefly on our experience in terms of utilization. I think one of the things that has helped so far is that the fund has, what we find compared to the other funds that we work with, are quite well-established processes in terms of your operating guidelines, which are very familiar to the Pacific, particularly countries that have accessed finance under the MDBs. And I'll give an example, the fund's approach to managing change requests. So most countries, of course, have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, which for project implementation has had significant impacts on the ability to implement projects, not just from a project management perspective, but also in terms of the relevance of project budgets, for example. Our experience in submitting change requests to the fund was that it was very streamlined. There was very clear guidance from the fund on the processes in place, very simple templates in place. And we were able to, under the scope of applying for a change request due to the circumstances of COVID-19. We're very pleased with the very quick turnaround from the Secretariat. We appreciate that. And we've recently submitted a further no-cost extension request to the fund. And I understand this will need to be considered at the board level, but we appreciate as well the clarity and the guidance. In terms of project reporting, I think this is an experience that we share with other Pacific Access accredited entities rather, and across the different climate funds. Often one of the issues, and this stems from the preparation phase, from design of projects through to the utilization of resources in terms of reporting, for example. I think one of the challenges that we face as Pacific SIDS, not just in terms of our distance from Fund Secretariat, is the lack of representation of the Pacific in the Secretariat itself. And sometimes this translates into the ability to appreciate the unique context of project implementation in the Pacific. As an example, with our project in the Federated States of Micronesia, some of the unique circumstances we deal with is that Micronesia is separated into several autonomous states. So we're dealing with a project implementation and governance levels at both the national as well as the state level. This impacts the relevance as well of the budgets that we have in place for project logistics, for example. Traveling out to the outer islands in any of the Pacific states that are quite scattered costs a lot of money. One of the experiences we've had following the global pandemic is there is an incredible there's been a significant increase in the demand for experts that have Pacific experience that are able to support the implementation of projects. And so having an increase in that demand has also increased the cost of hiring experts in this space. So those are some of the things that we've had to very carefully articulate in our reporting, as well as our change requests through to the Secretariat. But I don't want to single out any other fund in particular, but our experience comparatively with the Adaptation Fund has been very positive, and we're very grateful once again for the support from the Secretariat in facilitating that. The online submission process, which has recently been introduced for reporting, has not been very efficient for us in terms of our experience. There have been several glitches that we've had to flag with the Secretariat, but once again, very responsive from the Secretariat side. And we had hoped that there would have been a little bit more of a transitional period in rolling out the new online system, where we would have had the opportunity for a longer period of time to be able to submit reports that were paper-based. In terms of a way forward, I'm coming to the end of my intervention here, but in terms of a way forward, I found it very promising to hear, and I wasn't able to attend, and I understand that a few people weren't, the joint climate funds event last night, but I did follow quite closely on Twitter the updates, and I was very encouraged to hear the commitment from the heads of the climate funds towards complementarity. I think for us, from a portfolio management perspective, in terms of developing our pipeline, this is quite promising, as we have a number of projects that there would be interest to leverage support from both the GCF, for example, as well as the Adaptation Fund. I think that there is promise in terms of the harmonization of your processes, particularly with the fast track route for direct access. This is promising as well for some of our member countries who've yet to undertake accreditation. And in terms of the funding modalities that are available, we're very happy that beyond just the single country cap, there are additional funding modalities available to us. We are in the process of finalizing a proposal to access financing under the innovation facility, which I think Salih is going to speak on a little bit more later. And in terms of our pipeline of projects, we're looking at submitting over the next year around $25 million of financing requests with 3 of our countries. And yeah, I'll stop there and open the floor to any questions. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Salome, for this presentation and for the very honest and comprehensive feedback on our work. As I said at the beginning of this event, it's about hearing the voices of the people in the Pacific. And this is something that we really wanted to understand better what we're doing well and where we can improve both as a fund and working together with the other funds. So thank you very much for this. And as I said, this event is intended to be a dialogue. So now we'll have a small switch of our panelists, and we'll move to the second part where I will invite 2 colleagues from the Adaptation Fund to join the stage. And we'll have a brief discussion on what exactly the adaptation. Yep, you can. You can see here. Yeah. So we'll have a brief discussion on what the Adaptation Fund has actually learned from the Pacific. What are the programming directions? And Miko and I are now joined by 2 other colleagues. So on my left side is Miss Debbie Menezes. She is the chair of the Technical Evaluation Reference Group of the Adaptation Fund. Now, for those of you who are very confused by the 2 logos that are here on the screen and by hearing Adaptation Fund and Technical Evaluation Reference Group of the Adaptation Fund, the Technical Evaluation Reference Group is the evaluation unit, the independent evaluation unit of the fund that is looking for evidence and lessons from the work that the fund is doing in order to support accountability, learning, and improvement of programming. And on the right side of Miko is Ms. Saliha Dobarjic, who is in the programming on the programming side of the fund, and also the person leading the innovation facility. So we already heard a lot about the experience of the Pacific nations and working with the Adaptation Fund. So my question to all of you is, what have you learned up to now from both evaluation side and also in the implementation of projects? So maybe I'll start first with Debbie to share with us some of the learnings from the projects in the Pacific, what we have seen in evaluations, and after that, I'll also switch to Miko and Saliha.
Yes, thank you, Vlad. And may I also add my thanks to the Moana Pavilion for hosting us in this beautiful space. Thank you very much. So we do have tremendous scope for learning from what's happening in the Pacific Islands. And what we have done is we've looked at a number of the final evaluations, as well as some ex-post evaluation. I'll talk a little bit about that. So the lessons that I'm going to be talking about actually come from some of the project experiences that have been implemented by the fund. So the first thing I would say is invest in capacity. And we need to think about capacity more holistically. Practical experience from the fund project shows that capacity is really important, and building local capacity, governance processes, and engagement of local communities are key for effective and sustainable locally led adaptation. And capacity is obviously a key enabler in terms of access to funding. We've heard about that from Salome and the previous speaker. But implementing complex programs also requires the ability to think in a flexible way so that you can take adaptive management action. And this is really critical, particularly for adaptation projects where there are so many unknowns, emerging risks, and there has to be some flexibility. We've also found that for project success and for sustainability, it's important to understand, and engage local organizations and communities so that they are empowered as active agents of change and that they're more prepared to face new challenges. There's buy-in and there's ownership and there's sustainability, particularly when assets have been created or change processes are in place. We also learned that there's need for capacity and appetite for innovation and risk. And I'm looking at Saliha here particularly as new and emerging risks come up, the unknowns that can be effectively tackled. We also need to be thinking about absorptive capacity for the future so that programs can be taken to scale. When funds do become available, and that's something planning for the future. And then systemic capacity, thinking about the institutions and structures, but thinking about them across, institutions at the local level, but also thinking about the vertical integration, thinking about how it sort of, works between the interface between local and national decision-making processes. The second area, if I may, Vlad, is evidence and data. And this is just a narrow perspective from the evaluation unit. There's a lot of other things to be thinking about, but we need to devote sufficient attention to designing, monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems at the start of the project, rather than coming to the end of the project and then thinking, oh, what do we report against? And I would say that evidence and learning is really at the heart of the Adaptation Fund, and it's a learning fund. This is something we need to know. Data is very, very important. Particularly, one of the problems we find is that many projects don't put in place adequate systems to record and track data. So that important learning is lost. How do you capture that? It's really important for us to learn from each other. And that's why I think it's really important part of adaptation, adaptive management strategies, that you need to have data systems in place. We also need to be thinking about the theory of change. What are the pathways to different outcomes? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? How ambitious do we need to be? And we do appreciate, particularly for the Pacific Islands, that you face so many challenges. And I think you referred to a lot of them in terms of the dispersed, islands, the geographies. Adaptation is very context specific. It's very difficult to have common metrics across everything. Risks and conditions are constantly changing. We know that there's a risk of maladaptation, or indeed of reinforcing continued behavior so that you're not going to get change. We know all of this, yeah? And we also know that there's a risk that what if there's, slow onset of climate change versus an extreme event? How do you actually adapt or build that into your monitoring, evaluation, and learning frameworks? So these are a number of things. What we're doing is the AF-TERG is pioneering something called an ex-post evaluation. And we've actually piloted this in Samoa. It's one of the first cases that we did. So, at the end of a project, you think, what's the likelihood of my benefits lasting in the long term? And you make an assessment at that stage based on a number of factors like the institution, the political, the social, the resources available. And you think, okay, maybe, things will last. But what we're doing is we're coming back 3 to 5 years after the project has ended to see, have those benefits actually lasted? And is the system resilient? So for instance, can it now withstand a shock? Is it flexible? Is it dynamic? Has it taken into consideration other external things, events, systems, processes, institutions? Is there a feedback loop so that it's more dynamic, right? And that's the kind of sustainability and resilience elements that we come back 5 years later. And I think we're one of the few institutions that are actually doing this. And we would love to encourage more projects to participate with us. We do this in a sort of co-collaborative, co-creation mode. So, we want to make sure that we're partners, we're partnering on this really important learning exercise. And the very last thing I would say is sustainability needs to be thought of more comprehensively. We need to draw on community knowledge and partnership, and ownership of the project outputs is really critical after completion. We've also found that projects that integrate gender right at the beginning, think about gender metrics, and are compliant with the fund's environmental and social policies and gender policies are more likely to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie, for your very, very rich intervention. And you talk about capacity, you talk about data, and this is something very important, and I think so very important in the Pacific context. And I'm happy to hear that these are things that are emerging consistently through evaluations. But I also want to hear from Miko and Saliha the experience on the Secretariat side, both in the design of projects and implementation of projects. What have you learned up to now? What challenges have you seen to now? And how do you also plan to integrate those challenges to implement, to reflect those challenges in the future? Mikko, would you like to start first?
Thank you, Vlad. Let me respond just briefly, and then I'll hand over to Saliha, who is more closely working on the projects and on the innovation projects in particular. But I also wanted to really thank me and Salome for your remarks. Those were really, really great. And I appreciate also the sort of the constructive feedback on how we could improve the ways that we work. One thing that I didn't mention, but I think I forgot to mention, but it's very important for the Pacific SIDS in particular, is that at the accreditation stage, in addition to the fast track accreditation that we have between the climate funds, there's also something called the streamlined accreditation process, which is designed especially for smaller organizations and smaller governments. And I think each of the three national implementing entities from the Pacific, including Cook Islands, Tuvalu, and Federated States of Micronesia, have gone through that process. So we as an organization learned that it was more challenging for small organizations to address some of the questions in the accreditation process, and we changed, and we continue to do that because we want to be responsive to countries' needs and circumstances. On the projects, the topic of distance is that Salome made a reference to as well is real. We of course are available nowadays, especially after the pandemic, as we all learned to use Teams. Even us in the Secretariat, we learned to use Teams and Zoom and these things for exchanges on everything that relates to the work of the fund, including project development and so on. But we also recognize increasingly that even for the national implementing entities, it has been challenging after they have been accredited to access resources. And we are currently, we just started implementing a new medium-term strategy that as one element has an enhanced readiness program, which is going to pay more attention for support on technical support during project implementation as well, rather than just before projects are submitted. I think in terms of capacity, the work of the regional organizations like SPREP is very important in the region, and we want to find ways of working together with them to help countries access resources. Perhaps I'll hand over to Saliha because you have more to say than I do. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Well, actually, a lot of things that I wanted to say have been said by Debbie. Thank you, Debbie. And now I will basically just, kia orana, first of all. It's a real pleasure to be here. And what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about my experience when I visited. I actually had the honor to visit the Adaptation Fund projects in 2019. And indeed, it was eye-opening. Salome, I appreciate what you said about just having to see it, to believe it. It's really important to understand that it's a different world, very unique in so many ways. And we have to honor that in the projects. The first thing that I think maybe struck me, besides the fact that the distances are so huge among the islands and the Pacifics and any other country, is the people. The people they have been adapting, and adaptation is not a foreign concept. It's a very sort of resilient mindset. But even so, I think that obviously what we're seeing in terms of climate change is so unprecedented that it's testing even those limits. What we saw through the project, my colleague and I, through the projects that we've seen, is that innovation is happening organically. And so this has been in a way, one of the starting points even for the Adaptation Fund to think about, well, how do we enable that spirit of can-do that certainly exists, and at the same time to enable locally led solutions to basically to rise up to the surface, where they can be seen, where they can be tried out, where they can be replicated if they're successful and spread. So when we talk about these kinds of, and I mean, already these things are happening through our projects, without our projects, but for example, in the projects in Samoa, there is support to there were small grants given to communities to develop their own plans and their own solutions. And then the issue there is how to work across the scales, because it's really important to coordinate at all scales. So down to the community level, but it also needs to be coordinated in a way that the risks are not exported, for example, via solutions from one community to another, or that there is an economy of scale. You need that, for example, if developing a disaster risk management or early warning system. So there needs to be a coherent approach. And I'm happy to have seen that while more work needs to be done there, that even through the Adaptation Fund projects, because adaptation is so cross-cutting, we're already seeing that this kind of coordination is necessary and becoming routine. So that is one very positive aspect of the project. So the other thing is that there are certain challenges, such as functioning supply chains, which is very difficult given the distances and the cost that comes with that. And so a lot of this sort of being able to be locally resilient, in your own island, being able to produce your own food is important for so many reasons, but especially when the disaster strikes. We're seeing so many co-benefits from having that capacity to be more self-reliant with water, with food, in the sense that, for example, the health benefits, and health is a huge issue. Of course, at this COP was the first health day ever, and we're happy to as the fund, we're happy to obviously support adaptation in that sector as well. And we already have these experiences that have given us so much to work with. We have a project in Fiji, for example, that is all about infrastructure in informal settlements, that in the times of disaster prevent some of these more adverse health effects, such as especially on children, the elderly, and the disabled, so that they're able to hopefully come away unscathed. There were so many impressions, and I think that maybe we're not so good on time, but it's been a real pleasure and honor to see these projects and to see the resilience that is already there. So I just want to say that we're very happy that SPREP and SPC have both been invited by the board to submit their proposals to implement innovation, small grants programs under the Adaptation Fund Climate Innovation Accelerator partnership, which is growing. You're welcome to come to our side event on that tomorrow. We hope to see you there. And we look forward to further devolving finance in the Pacific, which I think will be a great positive step. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saliha. I actually wanted to take some questions from the audience as well, but we are running out of time. So what I would like to suggest is that after the end of this event, you can approach us and we can have bilateral discussion over there. But I want to thank all the panelists today, both from the Adaptation Fund side and also our Pacific panelists for joining us. And I think it was a very important exchange to have all of us here in one place to learn from each other. And I think this is a very good way for collaboration and a very good way also for hearing each other's voices. So thank you everybody for joining us at this event today. And as I said, let's continue our discussions bilaterally outside. Thank you very much.